Next week on Thursday, Chapter 8. Lights Out. There was a problem with the car, so I had to walk. The sun sweltered at its zenith when I set out to visit Harold on that Thursday afternoon. I snatched a moment to cool off in the air-conditioned comfort of the foyer before taking a deep breath and stepping into his room. I watched him unobserved before he grew aware of my presence. Harold looked up at the sound of my voice. He was hunched in his chair in what looked like an uncomfortable position. His eyes sparkled when he saw me. He rose shakily to his feet. His belt was pulled in several notches to keep his pants from falling down, and I was struck all over again by the reed-like fragility of his frame. The enormous nose that once lent such character to the quirky countenance seemed longer and larger in a face whose cheekbones, jawbones, and eye sockets had become exaggeratedly pronounced. I got into the habit of reading to my friend as we sat together each week. This way, he didn't have the burden of verbal communication thrust upon him, and we could still enjoy each other's presence. Sometimes I took my journal with me to read from my backyard musings. I had a poem and a short script for him today. My heart swelled as I read, observing the glow of appreciation in his eyes. I played all the roles in the script, never bargaining for the effect the performance would have on him. Jeweled tears shone in his eyes, lingered on his lashes, and threatened to spill over. He made no attempt to brush them away when he leaned forward and took the stapled sheaf of papers from my hands. "That was powerful," he murmured. "How could you know of such despair and desperation?" From time to time, I was actually able to understand his words. "There's a little bit of Pamela in every woman, I suppose," I answered, referring to the main protagonist in the short play. Or maybe I was writing about myself. He smiled quizzically, folded the sheets, and indicated that he'd like to keep them. I nodded. He half opened the top desk drawer and slid them inside. The words limped across the screen when he stabbed at his keyboard. "I'll take these home to read aloud to Gloria." An imp of mischief flared in his eyes. I laughed out loud. I couldn't help myself. His lips quivered with wry amusement. And then, unexpectedly, the power went out. The lights flickered and died. The computer shut down with a queer moan. The new secretary came in. Her face was expressionless. "The phones are dead, Mr. Wiseman," she announced. She made me uncomfortable. I didn't know why. Harold's lips moved. "Go home, Kathy," he grunted hoarsely. The keyboard and screens were useless now. "Don't forget to turn the machines off, Mr. Wiseman, and drive carefully. The street lights won't be functioning. There'll be chaos on the streets," she intoned in a thin, reedy voice, devoid of inflection. The main door shut with a click. Kathy was gone. The office sounds were stilled. An unaccustomed silence hung over the building. My cell phone was dead. I couldn't contact David for my ride home. I turned to Harold. "Would you mind?" Before the words were entirely out of my mouth, he smiled a delighted acquiescence. We stepped out into the corridor, and my gaze alighted on the narrow flight of steps leading to the upper floor. "Is that Gloria's office?" I asked. Harold was 2 steps ahead of me. He inclined his head and mouthed, "Do you want to see it?" I did. He reached for my hand and led me unsteadily upwards. I supported him as best I could. Faltering at times, we made a laborious ascent to the upper floor and entered a pleasant room through a door directly off the compact landing. Gloria's office was small and uncluttered. The furniture was outdated, discards from home upgrades, I supposed. An old table set against the window served as an office desk, with bits of bric-a-brac and assorted family memorabilia scattered all over it. The window faced the parking lot, which explained how she was always aware of when I visited. A piece of inexpensively mounted artwork hung on the wall adjacent to the door with some lines of poetry in free verse. The sentimental title was in larger print. Too personal in a professional setting, I thought. I wondered if he had given it to her. Harold lowered himself into the armchair by the couch, holding onto the polished wooden armrests. He observed as I stood perusing the poem. Absorbed, I almost missed his words. "You have so much energy." I did, with plenty to spare, perhaps. His eyes were wistful, resigned. I felt almost guilty about being the way I was, brimming over with health and vitality, as if I was being selfish and not sharing. I took the hand he proffered and helped him to his feet. Together we retraced our journey down the shadowed stairway. I followed Harold as he tottered around the office, shutting off machines and locking up. I climbed into the passenger seat of the silver Acura and watched as he fumbled with the knobs on the dashboard to find a local news station. A voice blared through the speakers. "The power outage is province-wide and could be indefinite. Investigations are being made." A somber thought lurked uppermost on our minds. This could be a terrorist attack. The traffic lights were not working, as Kathy warned, but there was no untoward mayhem on the streets. It was still broad daylight, of course. Harold took my hand and held it while he steered with his free hand. His skin felt like paper. A road map of blue veins rioted all over it. The fingers I held loosely in mine were barely more than bony claws. He didn't look fit enough to drive. I dropped a peck on his cheek and climbed out. "Thank you. See you in 2 weeks." We were booked to fly to Disney World the next morning to celebrate the twins' 12th birthday. Harold backed the SUV out of the driveway. He drove with confidence. From where I stood, no one could know there was anything the matter with him. I hadn't felt unsafe sitting at his side in the passenger seat. I swallowed hard at the wicked lump in my throat and waved until the vehicle faded out of sight. A fortnight was a long time at this stage in his illness. To be continued.